Oftentimes, supervisors and managers ask the question, well, how do I develop an inclusive climate? And so I'd like to give you kind of four ways in which you can engage your employees in the creation and the establishment of an inclusive environment, inclusive climate. So, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. My name is Andre Koen. And over the last, I don't know, 25 years or so, I've been in this diversity space. And I just want to share some of the lessons that I've learned as a leader in this space in terms of how to create and establish inclusive environments and inclusive climate in the workplace. So, first, it's important to do an assessment of your climate. And one of the places that I'd like to start, it seems like an unorthodox approach or an unorthodox place to look for climate, is actually attendance records. I know, and I know it sounds interesting, but I, particularly on my team, I look to those are kind of canaries in the mind, if you're familiar with that term, right? So they used to have these canaries that would tell miners used to have these canaries that would tell them when danger or gases were released into the atmosphere and the environment, the mining environment, and sometimes they would die, and that's how they would know that there's some gases. And other times, birds would chirp or make noises. And so, when I think about the attendance records of my employees, that's a clear indication of what my climate is, right? So what I know is that as microaggressions, as unconscious bias is kind of unleashed in a work setting, that those have negative impacts on discretionary effort, right? The willingness people have to participate or give their 100% best. And so if I'm looking at high complaints, if I'm looking at high um, attrition or transition in and out of my department, or I'm looking at high numbers of absences, this could be an indication that there's something going on in my culture that I have to identify. And so I need to pay attention by to creating an environment that people want to be a part of, right? And so that's one of the ways in which assessing my climate could be of value to me. The other thing is to articulate what are the standards of inclusion, right? So people will say, well, I don't want to be politically correct, or you're trying to make me stand on some kind of political grounds, and that kind of thing. And I'm not interested in that at all. As a supervisor, as a manager, I've never been interested in that. What I have been interested in is your effectiveness to get your work done. And so some of the standards of inclusion require us to use language that creates bridges as opposed to tear down bridges, right? To approach folks with curiosity as opposed to judgment, to encourage the dissenting voice. So I want to hear. So we've all made this decision. Is there anyone, or how might someone take another look at what we're trying to create and come up with a different result, right? And so looking at these standards of inclusion are extremely important. So really defining what does inclusion look like, not just as a leader, but for the group that you're leading. Right. Next is role modeling those behaviors. So once you have established what inclusive behaviors look like, how we define inclusion, then it becomes absolutely imperative for the leader to model those things. And I do want to check us on this term leadership. I believe that we are all leaders, and we all have a responsibility within an organization to lead, right? And so when we think about this role modeling of behavior, we all can be role models of the behavior. And then lastly, we have to really think about how do we actively hold each other accountable to making sure that those things were inclusive. I know that back in the 80s, there was a term used to try to help remind people to be inclusive or to be thoughtful about how their behavior and their intentions are aligned. And so there was this concept called ouch, right? So if someone said something that was somewhat out of pocket or made wasn't in keeping with the values or um, the principles of inclusion, people would say ouch to remind those folks, right? To keep us accountable. And so when we think about this notion of the creating this inclusive environment, we have to recognize that not only, just like all things that are made by human beings, not only do we have to intentionally create it, we have to intentionally maintain it, right? And as context changes, we also have to intentionally transform it to meet the new challenges of a changing context. And so, as you think about your role as an inclusive leader, I think it's important to recognize those four things as pertinent to recognizing how we can be effective. So, actively guide behavior, role model behavior, articulate standards of inclusion, assess your climate. And in doing so, you will be able to create an inclusive climate. My name is Andre Koen. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing who you become as we continue these conversations around inclusive leadership. Goodbye.